And so you need to go beyond just looking at a chart or graph and saying, okay, on the x-axis is this, on the y is this, and this says that there are 1,000 starving children in Ethiopia, and you need to go past that and say, well, how am I going to use this data to solve that problem? So you need to go a little bit past description. And that's something many students aren't used to, because I think throughout your life you've been told that you can only describe problems but not fix them. And now I'm trying to explain to you that you are the young folks who are going to fix the world's problems. And so we as older people have put a lot of faith in you. And so I'm trying to teach you how to identify and fix the world's problems, at least the social problems. If you're going to be a nurse, you'll fix the world's medical problems. If you're an attorney, you'll fix the world's legal problems. But for this class, it's social problems. Although this is not a social problems class, you don't have to write about a social problem. That's just students tend to swing that way because it's a little bit more fun to find a problem and fix it than to just do an analysis of data. Unless you're a statistician, then go for it. But really, my approach to teaching and to learning is to do sociology. So this is a practical approach. This is how I was instructed in my undergrad. You might call it an applied approach. So this is applied sociology. It's practical, where we are talking about real life issues and how we can analyze those. So you don't have to write about starving children in Ethiopia if that doesn't interest you. Allow you to pick whatever you want, whatever interests you, and then really analyze how we can make that thing better. And this is called doing sociology. So in the discipline, you can really refine it, and you can talk about doing family sociology or doing demography. So because we're a rather generalized class in here, just say doing sociology. Who should watch this video? I'm going to put it online, so whoever's not here can also watch it. I'm going to put it online for my family and society class as well through Michigan State, because the same principles apply throughout the social sciences. Whether you take an anthropology class or another sociology class or many psychology classes, the same principles are going to apply to this. If you're writing for a wide variety of journals, whether you're writing for a demography journal, American Sociological Review, or a social problems journal, or if you're just doing a research paper, you're going to want to apply these same principles to your research and writing, because this is the way that you write scientifically. None of us in here are really journalists or going to be journalists or TV personalities. It's not TMZ. We're not investigative reporters. We're actual scientists now. And so a lot of times students are forgetting that sociology is a science, because we'll talk about fun stuff like families or food and eating at McDonald's, and this is real life stuff, but we actually have to take a step back and remember that we have to approach these issues scientifically through scientific methods, and we have to have hypotheses, and we have to have data as our results, even if our data is qualitative and not numeric. So whether it's a family and society class or an intro class or a population and demography class, the research, writing, and the progression of those two activities is going to be universal. The style of this presentation is it's going to be a sample journey through the research and writing process. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm doing research on in the very early stages and how I work that through, so you can use it as a sample. But you can really plug and play your own topics and ideas into this system and come out with some good things. We're going to start with the topic choice and then progress towards development of the topic, focusing on the finished product. At all times throughout this semester, what I've done for you is have you maintain a focus on a finished product. Even at the beginning with the first essays, we're developing what our interest area is, and then we are refining a research question and building elements and variables. So every step of the way is towards the final product. And then, of course, we learn new techniques and new shortcuts and new practices along the way, as will be within this presentation. So the first thing we did, this is a review of the semester, the first thing we did was pick a topic, something that interested us. And I was hoping for all the students to focus on the bullet points contained within the syllabus. In our family class, our main topics were union formation and dissolution, relationship quality, childbearing, parenthood, work issues, and intergenerational transfers. Several of those bullet points can actually be applied to population and demography studies, and many of you have jumped on that bus and taken those. And that's okay. In this population and demography class, we should be talking about the composition of neighborhoods and social networks. I know 2 students are doing a lot on cities. We could talk about population processes and social policy considerations, or suggestions to lawmakers on how they should write laws and social policies. Precursors of poor adult health. And so this poor adult health could also be related to family and society in how the children are raised and the eating habits they may have growing up and leading to their healthy or unhealthy outcomes as adults. Causes and consequences of health for children, and those 2 tie in there, also related to family and society. So you can see how these 2 classes and 2 general approaches to sociological study are intertwined. Low fertility around the world also can tie into family. Migration processes, the basic movement of individuals or groups throughout the world or throughout nation states. Diversity and inequality among populations, and that can tie all the way back to the neighborhood composition bullet point. So it's a good thing to start off with these bullet points that are from the syllabus and ask yourself, how am I writing a paper that falls within one of these categories? And if you're not, it's kind of scary. You have plenty of time to adjust it. You can maintain your general topic, but it's important that you stick to one of these basic frameworks in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, you're writing a good paper that's just not necessarily about population and demography. So you want to be kind of careful there. But you can find the links at anywhere along the line of how your interest relates to one of these or some derivation of it. And you can also link these concepts and bullet points to these concepts and bullet points, or concepts and bullet points from another class, whether it's psychology or some sort of healthcare class that you're doing. You can connect sociology to a lot of different things, and I would highly recommend doing that to maintain your interest along the way. So we start on my sample journey, and it's really important to start as basic as possible. So simple, with just 3 circles here. Things that I'm interested in. So I want to study families. I like sports, and I think that there are some problems in America. I didn't write America up here, but I'm also interested in my surroundings. But I think there are some major problems still existing with race, subtly, especially through sports. And race is connected to family quite a bit. Just on a basic level, your offspring, if they're biological, there's an intergenerational transfer there of that element of identity. So it's kind of easy to see how race would be tied to family. These are my 3 basic interests. So I'm going to figure out a way to tie them together: family, sports, and race. And this could be applied to the family and society class, obviously, because it's about family. It could also be applied to the population and demography class, as I'll show in the subsequent slides. So your journey should also include these 3 circles. I'm going to take a step back and show you again what I had: family, sports, and race. And now here, clarified more generally what those 3 circles are. The first one, which was family, is my unit of analysis. And your unit of analysis I'll talk in the future slides about what it could be, but you need to think about it right off the bat. That's who or what you're studying in what quantity. So if you want to study America, your unit of analysis could be the country, or it could be the globe, or it could be an individual person, or your unit of analysis could be a family or a neighborhood. So with population and demography class, a lot of times your unit of analysis is going to be based on a geographic area or a tribe or a clan or some group of people typically identified by a border boundary. Whatever it is, you have to look and define clearly what your unit of analysis is. Does everyone understand that concept? What a unit of analysis is. Then, of course, your projects are going to be based off your interests, and we call this the sociological lens. This is how you're viewing the world. If you're really if you're a really religious person and you want to look at hunger in Ethiopia through a religious lens, you could do that. And off the top of my head, I'm thinking colonization or missionaries and how they go bring aid to Africa, a lot of times through religious-based organizations. I know, personal narrative note, I know my dad gave me coffee recently that was in some way supporting feeding children in third world countries or something. Like they probably give a portion of their proceeds. And it was definitely some Christian-based thing, because that's what my dad does. Okay, so if your lens was religious, so be it. If your lens is philosophical, you'll be more a theoretical approach to your writing and project. My lens is going to be sports in America. Again, my unit of analysis is family. And then all projects should have some sociological categorization. And this here is socioeconomic status. And that's a vocabulary term you should remember from your intro classes. Sociological categories. I'll clarify those in a minute. Mine, back to this one, was race. My unit of analysis, family. And my lens, sports. So that's starting my framework of my research. Now, thinking about your journey, you need to define your unit of analysis within your project and, of course, within your minds. So the unit for your study could be any of the following, or you could just make your own up. It could be families. Christine, I know you're doing baby names, if you're still doing it. So I'm assuming that your unit of analysis is going to be families, because a baby name, typically, well, a baby is going to be offspring of a parent. And I'd say most often the parent names the baby, unless there's some culture that you're studying that I don't know about where the baby names don't come from the parents, and that's great. You'll teach me that. So, but your unit of analysis could be family, and I'm going to talk later about how important it is to define family. You can't just say your unit of analysis is family, because just like I indicated, well, there could be families where it's polygamy, or there could be families where the grandma takes care of the grandkids. So you'd have to define family, divorce, separation, in jail, what have you. Another unit of analysis could be the individual. And that's an interesting unit to look at. But it's there. Is anyone looking at the individual as their own unit of analysis in this class? No? You'd think at first that you'd want to look at baby names from an individual level, but if you think just a little bit more, probably family. Nation state. And we talked about how a nation state could be defined by a political border or by laws, or how it could not be defined by laws, more of a tribal state. Cities also defined sort of by laws and zoning, or neighborhoods, which aren't necessarily, unless you consider them wards, which most people don't. Most people are a little bit more relaxed with their definition of neighborhood, unless you're talking gang territory, which seems to go by blocks, which could be very closely correlated with wards in the city. or university if you're studying Saginaw Valley State or Michigan State, or community colleges, or universities of this size, or universities in America, or Ivy League universities, private schools, public schools. That could be your unit of analysis as well. So a unit of analysis, and I read some great stuff at this website, and I'll post this obviously so that you can go to that if you want. The unit of analysis is great as a question of emphasis, or it's a good thing to explain, go into depth, and clarify within your research project. But it's by no means the most important thing. Family in baby naming could be very important or not that important. It can't be the pinnacle of your research, just focusing on the unit of analysis. That would be describing a neighborhood, and this would be only half of the project, just describing the unit of analysis. But you need to go beyond that. So it's going to be your emphasis, it's going to be your focus, but it's not the most important thing in the world. It only plays a role in the whole grand scheme of things. So then you progress towards your interest or your lens, and you define that very clearly. I picked this one, family violence, off of this link from Sage Publications because it did a very good job of sort of defining how and why it's important to clarify your interests. Because family violence, for example, could go many different ways. But family violence, if that's your topic, if you're going to study family violence, or you're going to study baby names, or you're going to study starving children, first you have to figure out where does it happen, who is involved, who does it affect, what is it. So that's where you actually define what you mean by family, what you mean by violence. So it's very important that, in my case, I'm doing sports, but I would have to clarify that very much right off the bat. What sports I'm talking about, where they're happening, who's playing, who is it affecting, whether it's the employees of the arena, the players themselves, the fans who are watching on TV halfway around the world. What exactly it is, what a sport is. That's kind of fun to do. And then what it means to be an athlete, what it means to be a professional, what it means to be semi-pro or amateur. So if you're doing family violence, you would do the same thing. That lineage of questions is great for helping you define your topic, no matter what your topic, even if you're doing starving children in Ethiopia. So does anyone have questions about how to follow that lineage there? Or are you looking at that, being very frightened at your topic of interest and wondering how it can be clarified using those? Because that's very universal. If you put blanks here, what is a blank, what is a blank? But those first ones, where does it occur, between whom, who does it affect, and what is it? You should be able to very clearly express that in your projects. And these are some of the things that I'll be looking for just to test your competency in writing and research. So first, again, call back, you need to understand the unit of analysis, and then you need to understand the social structure and how it all fits together in society, as many of you like to use. The third thing in the bubbles was the sociological category, part of socioeconomic status, or SES. So the basic SES categories that I just threw up there, and there's a bunch, but these are just 5, right? It's going to be race or ethnicity, gender, age, income, and then especially relevant to population and demography class is place or geography, marital status, family structure and size. These are other types of SES categories. Basically, and we talked about it in this class, anything that you can get off the first part of the United States Census. They're categorizing you. And you look at the census and you don't think of it as sociological right off the bat. You think of it as governmental and this sort of thing. But it's very sociological. Right off the bat, the United States is categorizing us into these standards of SES. So you have to understand the categories. And you have to understand these categories as variables. when I was doing my Skype session with Michael Moore, I had a chance to ask him one question directly, and I asked him this question because he was Skyping into University of Michigan Flint, where he had attended. He was talking about Davison, where at least one of the students lived. He was talking about Flint, where we were at. The presentation was at University of Michigan Flint. And here we have all these students who have all bright futures ahead of them. And then we had Michael Moore on screen, who was very successful. And so I asked him, as clearly as possible, here's these students, and here's you. You're successful. They have potential. Some of these students may not turn out to be as successful as Michael Moore in their chosen pursuit. Not that they're all going to be famous movie makers, but just their level of attainment of their goals. But he has pretty much attained all of his goals as a filmmaker, because that's what he wanted to do. And I asked him, what's the switch that flipped? What is the difference between him, who grew up in the same place, went to the same school, had a lot of the same parents, and I'm just really generalizing here when I say same, but his parents worked at GM. There's 50,000 other guys in Flint whose parents worked at GM. His income was $30,000. There's 100,000 other people in Flint that's their income. He's white, so that's 250 other thousand people in Flint that are white. He's male. 300,000 people in Flint that are male. When he started to make it big, maybe he was in his 30s. I'm just like that, but what's the difference between me and him? It's still mysterious, and he had a hard time answering it. But that's really what we're looking for when we categorize people. So you have someone walking down the street who may have chosen a life of crime and drugs. And then right next to him is a guy, very rich, banker driving a Mercedes. So they could have had a lot of the same categories. We're trying to find out what's maybe one or a set of variables that causes the life outcomes of these two individuals to be different. So you have to figure out what's the category that will leave someone to choose one baby name over another. And the easiest one with baby names to think of right off the bat is going to be race. And then I think a more interesting one for me would be wealth and income level. But there's got to be geographic, naming clusters. Also periods. Names come into popularity during certain periods. A lot of times they'll be named after a TV show or a movie. And so if you have older parents, they're going to probably name from an older past generation or period. So back to my sample, just to reiterate, my unit of analysis was family. I'm going to have to define that very clearly when I write. My lens is sports. I'm going to have to define that very clearly when I write. And my SES category was race. This is very basic. But then that leads us to say, so what? So when you look at these, it's like families, sports, race. What's the big deal? And that's I go back to the starving children in Ethiopia one. So I'll say, so you told me that there were starving children in Ethiopia. So what? I already knew that they existed. So with all of your papers, if you tell me that, poor people live in the ghettos of cities, or cities are racially divided, or if you support Richard Florida's things, it's the creative cities are this way and are better economies or whatever, I just say, I've read a lot of stuff. I already knew that. So what? So what are you really bringing to the table? So you can't just tell me that there are starving children in Ethiopia. I'll say I already knew that. So what? I need to hear something fresh. And you're all bright enough to come up with something fresh. And you can come up with something fresh off old standard, elements. Family, sports, race, those aren't new. But my topic would have to be new based off of those. So starving children in Ethiopia, that's old hat, but you could come up with something very new and fresh off of it. Baby names, we've been naming babies for 1 billion years or whatever, so now just get something fresh out of it. So you have to answer that in your paper. So what? I read so many papers and so many pages, and I don't have the greatest attention span, and especially, well, I guess the playoffs will be over by then, but if there's a baseball game on, I really need to keep my attention. So I'll be looking for this, so what? And if I'm halfway through your paper and I'm still asking myself, so what, why is this important? You might have problems later on in the paper. So after you've done those first 3 bubbles, second you're going to ask yourself, well, what do I want to find out? What do I want to find out? Do I want to find out where the starving children are? What caused the starvation? How's the best way that we can help them? What's the worst thing we can do for them? What are the power structures built into that system? How is every time I buy a Starbucks coffee hurting or helping them? That'd be a fresh one. So you could get very unique, but you have to really clarify that, and you have to know that when you're writing. And I say a lot of times students will complain that writing a 12-page paper is hard, but if you really know your topic and you're interested in it, and you know the answer to this question, what do I want to find out? I want to find out this. Then you can just go to town. It's for those students that don't really know what they want to find out that have the biggest problem, because they'll write 2 pages. I don't see where this is going. Well, just keep asking yourself, what do I want to find out, and how am I going to get there? That will have your paper flowing so rapidly. So I've divided these back up into the bullet points from the syllabus again. What do I want to find out if I was in family and society class? What do I want to find out about union formation? I can think of a bunch of things. Why do people get married early? Why do they choose to wait? Why do they get divorced? Why do they have several marriages? Dissolution. Why do people stay together even after there's domestic violence? What causes people to, when they have kids, is there a higher divorce rate? So what am I trying to find out? The relationship quality. I was thinking Laura was going to do a paper like this. Why are certain people in certain situations, relationships, happier? Why do they live longer? What's the quality within the relationship that causes something or is correlated with some type of outcome, a life course outcome? So you talk about causation and correlation. If you're talking about childbearing, what do you want to find out about childbearing? The easiest one there is going to be the when and the how many of childbearing. Parenthood, that's most often looked at through a lens of parenting styles and the outcomes that result from them. So if you're a strict parent, are you going to have wealthier kids? If you're a laissez-faire parent, are you going to have more creative kids? Or criminals? What do you want to find out? Work and family issues and intergenerational transfers. Those are the transfers of capital, social capital, monetary capital, anything that you can quantify, even if it's quality, you can quantify it, from generation to generation. And then you could define your generations again as grandparent to grandkid, or from parent to child, or actually, and this might be kind of fresh, vice versa. So from child to grandparent, or from child to parent, especially in this time and age in America when we're having such a growing, aging population that needs a caregiver that is a lot of times a child, because of the way that healthcare pay structures are moving. You may look at intergenerational transfers from child to parent, especially if the parent has little to no insurance. Maybe they'll get a lot of money from their child and depend on their child to provide their care. Interesting stuff. So what do you want to find out about population and demography? What do you want to find out about the composition of a neighborhood? So I'll tell you all semester that Flint's segregated. On one side of the river is the black folks, and on the other side of the river is the white folks, and it's divided up by street. And the black neighborhoods, there's a higher crime rate. and they're poor, and then the white neighborhoods. And then within the white, wealthier neighborhood is a cluster of Middle Eastern or Indian doctors, and so they'll be why do they congregate? And then, as I've told you, my girlfriend's family is Lebanese, and they built a lot of their wealth in the early part of the 1900s in grocery stores. So why did they choose that? So these are intertwined. What's in the neighborhood could be intertwined with work and what they choose to do as career paths. Like I talked about the doctors in Flint, the grocers in Flint, and if it was my topic, we'd be talking about the athletes in Flint. I would talk about the Flintstones, and that's a group of African Americans, as well as a couple Caucasians. And then I will look at, as I'm going to say later, I'm going to look at the migration patterns. So where did the Flintstone basketball players go, and why did they come back? And if race is a variable, maybe it will differ, maybe it will be the same, but that's something that I'll have to find out. So that's composition of neighborhoods and social networks. Population processes, again, social policy considerations. What do you want to find out? Why the politicians pass their laws, or what the effects of the laws are. Precursors of poor adult health. We talked a lot in this class about adult health as well as fertility, and whether it's a natural causation or correlation, whether it's a political framework as far as like women's rights or abortion that will increase or decrease fertility rates. Causes and consequences of health for children, whether that's the amount of pop machines within a certain distance from a child's house, whether that's healthy eating habits that are passed from generation to generation. You could talk about all those types of things for the health of the children. Migration processes, again, that's movement throughout the globe, city, state, or nation of groups or individuals. And diversity and inequality among populations. Continually asking yourself, what do you want to find out? And that's going to help you form your research question, which I try to get you to do as early in the semester as possible. So if this were my sample journey, remembering my unit of analysis is family, my lens is sports, and my SES category is race, what I picked out of here that kind of relate to my sample journey, what I want to find out is I want to find out something about work and family issues, work being sports as a job, intergenerational transfers. So my topic, just briefly, will be if an athlete goes, for example, overseas to travel for their job, what sort of capital is the son or daughter going to gain from all of that movement? Whereas your parents' jobs, a lot of the students in this class are very deep-rooted in Michigan, and so there's going to be a difference, some difference that I'm going to try to search for, is what's going to happen, what's the result or the outcome for a child whose dad is going to go play in Israel, Greece, and France, then return back to Flint, versus a child whose parents own a construction company in Flint or are a dentist in Flint and just stay right there. So that's one where the variable of income could be relatively the same. You have a semi-pro athlete or a pro athlete overseas and a dentist or a doctor in Flint, get about the same income. The race could be the same. The doctor could be African American. The basketball player could be African American. The age, the child, they went to the same high school. So I'm going to try to figure out, in that case, maybe the one variable would be an international migration versus a deep-rooted stagnation within the city limits of Flint and the transfer to the child. So the composition of neighborhoods and social networks. What I want to study again is the international migration of athletes. So if they built a social network within their neighborhood of Flint, how strong are those connections, and is that what draws them back, or would that be what would keep them away? Or is that why they tried to get out of Flint in the first place, because it was so bad? I don't know. This will lead to an analysis of the migration process. When did they go where? That sort of thing. So I'm going to, again, form my research question. So you could look at that set too. Depending on what class you're in, if you wanted to just look at these or just look at these, you could. But I think it's going to be more valuable research if it's interdisciplinary or intertopic, intercourse, right? Interclass, right? It's a pun on words. Intercourse, interclass. It's a bad one, right? We're talking about fertility rates. Yeah, I have to throw those in. Plus, you know, it's that time of the night where you're starting to drift off to sleep. So, if it was interclass, interdiscipline, intertopic, intersubject, it's going to be more valuable in in-depth research. And if you were publishing to a scholarly journal, then you could publish to a couple different journals. You want to make yourself more marketable. So form your research question with that in mind. Again, on my sample journey, the development of my topics, I picked those off the previous slide, and then I'm whittling them down even more to networks, work or occupation, migration, and then I'm going to separate some of those bullet points out into my unit of analysis. So you see I've just pulled these bullet points from the syllabus from the previous slide, and then I separated them into what would be my topic overall versus what would be my unit of analysis applied. And here I pulled family and neighborhoods out of those bullet points as a unit of analysis. So you can do the same thing. And then I'm starting to develop research questions. How does a social network develop within professional sports? Or it could be amateur sports. How does a social network formed through professional sports influence where a person lives? So you could start forming questions like these. You could just reword them, slip in your subject matter, and you start to develop good research questions. Again, through my sample journey, I'm now going to find the variables. It doesn't have to be SES elements precisely, but something has to be variable within these. So I picked out networks. Those can vary. Obviously, if you're a hermit, you have a small network, social network. Or if you're very popular, you have a very large social network. Another variable would be occupation or work choice. Another variable is going to be migration, the difference between being a global traveler versus being very stationary. The composition of neighborhoods. So the neighborhood could be a variable, whether you live in a suburban or an urban, a poor or a rich neighborhood, a mostly black or a mostly white neighborhood. That could be variable. And also the family structure. At an early age, youth, and then once you settle down or have a family, you don't have to settle down, but you have your own family. So those could be variable as well. Some of the people that I'm going to study may have gotten married and had kids. Some have remained single. Some may have had very strong families growing up. Some parents may be in jail or have died. Who knows? So that's going to be variable. Just means that it's different among respondents. So here I'll look at the type of network. So I've pinpointed my variable. Then I'll look at what type of network. And I might say there's going to be a different network within the high school, age range, college, the neighborhood, or the church network. Then the level of the athlete. That's also going to be variable. Whether the athlete only made it to amateur level, whether they made it to a big or small college, how that affects the social network. Pro or semi-pro, international or domestic. I'll form my research question off of that. So back to my bubbles again, remembering my unit of analysis, family. What are the effects on the offspring? Starting to develop questions. Sports as my lens. How does it influence choice of place where the individual and family end up living? And for how long? And then race. What's changing in sports, in the migration patterns within race, if at all? If at all. And I'll put these together. So using those elements and variables and knowing, having a strong knowledge of what my subject is, this helps me develop a very clear, thorough, direct. Hopefully yours aren't this wordy. That was my only complaint to myself about this one, was it was too wordy. But it's going to develop a really clear title for your project. So mine, the title for my project is International Migration Patterns Influenced by professional sports. Subheading is a qualitative analysis of athletes returning to Michigan. So that's going to be more clear. The first one's using the words of my scientific study. International migration, so right, travel, international migration, where you live. Patterns, that's very important because you can't just look at, if you're looking at murder, for example, and where it happens, you don't just look at murder. Hey, there's another murder. You would look at patterns, maybe time of year and also neighborhood. So you have to look for patterns. In my case, patterns of international migration. And then going to the causation correlation thing, I can't just describe the migration. I have to talk about how it's influencing something or was influenced by something else, some type of causation or correlation. So I'm connecting it to professional sports as the correlative element. And then another clear explanation of what I'm doing. I will be doing a qualitative analysis of athletes, that's my sample and population, who returned to Michigan, again clarifying my sample and population. So that would exclude non-athletes, and it would exclude athletes who choose not to return to Michigan. I would include the non-returnees within my paper as a comparison, but I will be focusing on doing surveys and interviews only with those who return to Michigan. So the topic, international migration, within the title, now it's very coming to the top, it's very clear, the lens, sports. But you can see my lens, I'm basing a lot of my research and writing on sports, but sports or starving children is not, we're not getting lost swimming in just that topic. We've moved so far past that, or that lens. So the unit of analysis and the categories, the clarification and the development of those will come later. Just start at this point with these few things. So that's the end of part one, how to get a framework for your subject matter. Very important elements you need is the unit of analysis, your lens, and your categorization. You need to really convey clearly to me what it is you're trying to find out, what it is you're trying to add to the field of sociology, and also why that's important. The who cares thing. So that wraps part one of 3. I'll be doing a second part tonight after a break. And of course, open the class for questions about this or about your paper in general, or about the rest of your life. So take a short break, and then, if you would be so kind, return to part 2. All right? And so you need to go beyond just looking at a chart or graph and saying, okay, on the x-axis is this, on the y is this, and this says that there are 1,000 starving children in Ethiopia, and you need to go past that and say, well, how am I going to use this data to solve that problem? So you need to go a little bit past description. And that's something many students aren't used to, because I think throughout your life you've been told that you can only describe problems but not fix them. And now I'm trying to explain to you that you are the young folks who are going to fix the world's problems. And so we as older people have put a lot of faith in you. And so I'm trying to teach you how to identify and fix the world's problems, at least the social problems. If you're going to be a nurse, you'll fix the world's medical problems. If you're an attorney, you'll fix the world's legal problems. But for this class, it's social problems. Although this is not a social problems class, you don't have to write about a social problem. That's just students tend to swing that way because it's a little bit more fun to find a problem and fix it than to just do an analysis of data. Unless you're a statistician, then go for it. But really, my approach to teaching and to learning is to do sociology. So this is a practical your research and writing, because this is the way that you write scientifically. None of us in here are really journalists or going to be journalists or TV personalities. It's not TMZ. We're not investigative reporters. We're actual scientists now. And so a lot of times students are forgetting that sociology is a science, because we'll talk about fun stuff like families or food and eating at McDonald's, and this is real life stuff, but we actually have to take a step back and remember that we have to approach these issues scientifically through scientific methods, and we have to have hypotheses, and we have to have data as our results, even if our data is qualitative and not numeric. So whether it's a family and society class or an intro class or a population and demography class, the research, writing, and the progression of those two activities is going to be universal. The style of this presentation is it's going to be a sample journey through the research and writing process. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm doing research on in the very early stages and how I work that through, so you can use it as a sample. But you can really plug and play your own topics and ideas into this system and come out with some good things. We're going to start with the topic choice and then progress towards development of the topic, focusing on the finished product approach. This is how I was instructed in my undergrad. You might call it an applied approach. So this is applied sociology. It's practical, where we are talking about real life issues and how we can analyze those. So you don't have to write about starving children in Ethiopia if that doesn't interest you. Allow you to pick whatever you want, whatever interests you, and then really analyze how we can make that thing better. And this is called doing sociology. So in the discipline, you can really refine it, and you can talk about doing family sociology or doing demography. So because we're rather generalized class in here, just say doing sociology. Who should watch this video? I'm going to put it online, so whoever's not here can also watch it. I'm going to put it online for my family and society class as well through Michigan State, because the same principles apply throughout the social sciences. Whether you take an anthropology class or another sociology class or many psychology classes, the same principles are going to apply to this. If you're writing for a wide variety of journals, whether you're writing for a demography journal, American Sociological Review, or a social problems journal, or if you're just doing a research paper, you're going to want to apply these same principles to all times throughout this semester. What I've done for you is have you maintain a focus on a finished product. Even at the beginning with the first essays, we're developing what our interest area is, and then we are refining a research question and building elements and variables, so every step of the way is towards the final product. And then, of course, we learn new techniques and new shortcuts and new practices along the way, as will be within this presentation. So the first thing we did, this is a review of the semester, the first thing we did was pick a topic, something that interested us, and I was hoping for all the students to focus on the bullet points contained within the syllabus. In our family class, our main topics were union formation and dissolution, relationship quality, childbearing, parenthood, work issues, and intergenerational transfers. Several of those bullet points can actually be applied to population and demography studies, and many of you have jumped on that bus and taken those. And that's okay. In this population and demography class, we should be talking about the composition of neighborhoods and social networks. I know 2 students are doing a lot on cities. We could talk about population processes and social policy considerations, or suggestions to lawmakers on how they should write laws and social policies. Precursors of poor adult health. And so this poor adult health could also be related to family and society in how the children are raised and the eating habits they may have growing up and leading to their healthy or unhealthy outcomes as adults. Causes and consequences of health for children, and those 2 tie in there, also related to family and society. So you can see how these 2 classes and 2 general approaches to sociological study are intertwined. Low fertility around the world also can tie into family. Migration processes, the basic movement of individuals or groups throughout the world or throughout nation states. Diversity and inequality among populations, and that can tie all the way back to the neighborhood composition bullet point. So it's a good thing to start off with these bullet points that are from the syllabus and ask yourself, how am I writing a paper that falls within one of these categories? And if you're not, it's kind of scary. You have plenty of time to adjust it. You can maintain your general topic, but it's important that you stick to one of these basic frameworks in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, you're writing a good paper that's just not necessarily about population and demography. So you want